everybody. Good day, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. A happy Saturday to you all. Thank you so much for being here. We're at the midpoint way of the Architecture Fringe. Welcome to the Architecture Fringe. And if you're new to the festival, a warm welcome to you. And if you've joined us before, it's nice to see you again. Thanks for being here. My name is Andy Summers. I'm a co-founder and co-director of the festival. And along with my colleagues here, Liana Bauer, Raina Armstrong and Cam Chan, we welcome you to this online space. The Architecture Fringe is a volunteer-led organisation based in Scotland, which explores architecture in social, political and cultural contexts. For the Architecture Fringe 2021, our provocation is on learning, where we encourage participants to interrogate behaviours, beliefs and biases in order to acknowledge how the world really is to then reimagine how it could be. For the core programme for this year's festival, we do explore the unlearning provocation through a number of areas, including education, practice, whiteness and race, and COP26. Today we explore land and the occupation, use and stewardship of it through some neighbourhoods around the world. Common ground, common good, unlearning land. We'll hear from voices in Detroit, Glasgow and Kolkata to explore pluralities and common areas of concern in community development and organising, strategic activism and cultural sustainability at neighbourhood level. I'll now hand over to Liana, my colleague, to introduce the event and our wonderful guests.
Hello, so welcome everyone to this kind of sunny morning in Edinburgh and across the world. And welcome to our second land event. Last week, we focused on holistic strategies for land use and the interconnectedness between people and the land. And we heard from voices from the Scottish Highlands, Palestine and the mobile indigenous people and the ancestral lands in India represented by Intrani Sigmani. This week, we want to explore the relationship between land and people at community and neighbourhood level by connecting voices in Detroit, Glasgow and Kolkata. As Andy said, we want to explore pluralities and common areas of concern in community development and organization, strategic activism, cultural sustainability, and all of this on neighborhood level. Despite their uniqueness, there is much to tell, share, and unlearn from. This project seeks to provide a context to meet, exchange, and listen. Conversations will delve into deep community wisdom, knowledge, and lived experience. This discourse will shed light on nuanced and often complex relationships to land. Today, we will hear from three groups, Govanhill Bass from Glasgow's South Side and the Eastside Community Network based on Detroit's East Side, and who, whilst very different with different agendas due to their context and hinterland, deploy more familiar strategies of community organizing. But we will also hear from Nita Das and her team at Mansara, who are trying to give a voice to the street vendors of Southern Avenue in Kolkata, where community organizing, as we know it, doesn't exist, and where those voices therefore often go unheard. This is a starter event, and our localities will work with their own communities throughout the summer to develop cultural work representing their relationship to land and the issues they're facing. These will be presented in a follow-up event, which we will hold later this year in autumn. And it's also part of our own unlearning process of how to deliver meaningful projects and a meaningful dialogue. Moving on to the structure of the event. So the event is built as a 2-hour event. We will have presentations from all three localities, which will last around 20 minutes. Where they tell us about their context, their hinterland, but maybe also to provoke us. And then this will be followed by a facilitation question session, and then we will move on to questions from the audience. The first group presenting is Govanhill Bass, followed by the Eastside Community Network, and then we move on to Kolkata. So this is me. I'm handing over to our first locality. Please welcome Govanhill Bass.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for coming along today. We are really excited to have been invited to the Architecture Fringe and to be able to work with people in Detroit and Calcutta. I'm just going to get straight into my presentation. Here's the start. It's in 1917 and this is Calder Street Municipal Bath and Wash House, which is in Govanhill. It had 3 pools, a large pond, a ladies' pool, and a training pool. It had the steamy, a wash house, and what were known as slipper baths, where people could go along and actually get a bath to wash themselves. It was considered to be the best in its range at the time, and was well used by the whole community. This is at the time when Glasgow was called the second city of the empire, and very importantly at that time as well, it had a very organised working class. So with successful actions on the rent strikes, which people might have heard of, and Red Clydeside. I'm just going to zoom straight forward to 2001, because what happened with that pool was the City Council decided that they were going to close it because they had started to build modern, larger pools, but they were much further away from the community. And the people in Govanhill just, you know, were absolutely against this, hadn't been consulted, got together as soon as it was they found out that this was going to happen, and set up the Save Our Pool campaign in the January of 2001. They decided that the only way that they were going to stop this closure was to occupy the building. This could have been for a number of reasons. At that time, it was the 30th anniversary of the Upper Clyde Shipyard's occupation. So like occupation was kind of in the air. So on the 21st of March 2001, about a dozen Save Our Pool campaigners went into the building and chained themselves to the cubicles. The occupation went on for 140 days and was kind of characterised by being colourful, fun, creative, with everybody in the community getting involved, from children to grandmothers, from the unemployed to the academic, the Asian community, the Irish community, just across the whole range of everybody that was affected by this closure. So we have all this material in our archive and are celebrating this year because it's the 20th anniversary. Something about Govanhill is that, I mean, the Victoria Road, this is from the 1930s, Victoria Road. Now, all these buildings are still here. And there was a lot of activism then. You know, this is a May Day march going up to Queen's Park. And on the left-hand side, you can see the Socialist Sunday School that was active in Govanhill. This is Paul Robeson May Day Parade in Glasgow in 1960, again in Queen's Park. And this bandstand is now called the Arena, but that's still there and it's still used. Here we can see it being used just last month for the remembrance of George Floyd. So these parts of our built heritage are still there, they're still used and very much loved by the people of Govanhill. The Save Our Pool campaign became the Govanhill Basque Community Trust in 2004 because the City Council had to put the building out to see if anybody would use it for its original purpose. So that's when the trust said, okay, if the City Council are not going to reopen this baths, which was always its original campaign aim, then they would have to organise a trust with the aim of reopening the baths as a community wellbeing centre. Since then, the trust has really become a community hub in Govanhill with lots of wellbeing projects. So it's got Tai Chi, yoga, arts and crafts. It's got upcycling for textiles, woods and plastics. It's got an up hub to do this. It's got an arts venue, the Deep End. It's got ceramics. It's got Govanhill Hill Baths are. It's got the archive, it's got the People's Pantry, it's got community action, it's got learning and outreach. So just a whole wide range of activities that have been going on and that have really developed since the trust formed in 2005. All of this material you can see on our website, and you can book to join events. This is just a kind of some photographs of those events from the ceramics, and it's just very vibrant. And all of these activities are, you know, organised by the community and for the community. This is the youth club. And these are members of the youth club with a new mural that was designed. And this is just, I think it's a lovely piece of work. This was from the youth club. They had a drawing competition for International Women's Day, and a young person came up with this beautiful poster. This is the People's Pantry. So I'm not sure if people know about food banks, but in the UK, over the last 10 years, there's a huge rise in poverty and inequality, and people have been relying on food banks to feed themselves. The People's Pantry is something different from that. It's more to do with tackling food inequality by making it available to the whole community, where you become a member and you can shop for a very small amount of money each week. Sorry, this is the Deep End, the arts project. So here we have the ceramics, we have the Rags to Riches, we have the Up Hub, and I've just recently moved there as well with the archive. So it's a real place of production and exhibition where people can come along and get involved. This is a new film that's just been made about the baths, and it really kind of shows the amount of work that it's doing. So you can watch this on our website. It's only about 13 minutes long, but it includes everything that the baths are doing. So especially in building capacity for other groups within the area, like the Somali Association and Unity Sisters, which is a refugee women's group. So the baths is actually supporting other community groups within the area. And this, at the moment, the baths have been closed because we were able to raise the £9.2 million to refurbish it. And this will be reopened next year as a wellbeing centre with 2 swimming pools, a sauna, a Turkish, a gym. And where the steamy was at the back, we're hoping to be able to develop that for our independent archive and museum and a small reference library. I just want to talk a wee bit about actually Govanhill. So 20 years ago in Govanhill, there wasn't much else other than kind of old men's pubs. The shops, the high street was going downhill, and it's really changed, especially I would say in the last 5 to 7 years. And I think the development of the trust and its commitment to investing in the community has influenced that. So now we see lots of social enterprises popping up. So this is a locavore grocery shop which sources its food locally. Around Glasgow, it grows its own vegetables. On the left-hand side, this is the Remade network. So this is a repair shop where you can go in, you know, and repair your electrical goods instead of binning them. So again, about waste reduction. On your right-hand side here is Milk Cafe, which is a cafe that was set up to really cater for the refugee and asylum seeker community, but not in a kind of ghettoized way. So it's open to the whole community, but it does hold English lessons and various kind of activities to support people who don't have English as their first language. That's another point I should mention, is because Govanhill is the most culturally diverse area in Scotland. It now has over 88 different languages spoken. Originally, when the baths were built, it was the Irish, the Jewish, the Italians and the Highlanders. Then in the 50s, it was the South Asian community. And over the last 20 years, Eastern European, Roma, it's got the largest Roma community in Scotland. And now lots of North African and different communities from all around the world, actually. It also has a big community of artists and students who've been attracted to all the amazing activities that are going on. This is on the left-hand side, you know, just showing this diversity, the vibrancy of the neighbourhood. This is Transylvania Cafe, and they're just so creative that, you know, they just come out, they take over half of the street and, you know, create a little cafe. This is their beautiful coffin that's got a skeleton in it and skeletons flying over above. Pink Peacock, this has just opened up. So it's a queer Yiddish anarchist community cafe. Unfortunately, there is, you know, racism and bigotry exists in Govanhill. Although there's all these amazing projects that are kind of fighting against that. So someone smashed their window, but I really like the way that they've just covered it up and written exactly who they are on the front. They haven't been intimidated. They're not going away. They're staying. On the left-hand side here, we have Radio Buena Vida, so a community radio that runs out of a cafe. And just on the right, showing Victoria Road, you know, this is like one of the main roads that goes through Govanhill. And all these tenements have been here for over 100 years. And it's something that really connects all of the people that have come to live in Govanhill, because they've all lived in one of these tenement closes. This is another social enterprise, Bike for Good, which we worked with earlier in the year with the Annette Street St Bride's Primary School children. So they teach people to ride bikes, they repair bikes, you can learn to repair bikes, they have cycling groups for women, all sorts of different projects. So this year, as I said, we're celebrating this occupation because Govanhill's changed so much over the last 20 years that we think perhaps people don't know the story. It's a very well-known story. It was national news, it's even internationally known. But we really want to celebrate this. We really want to look at why the Save Our Pool campaign decided to occupy and what the benefits of saving this building and creating the trust has had on Govanhill as an area in general. So it was really good that the Architecture Fringe got in touch with us because we really want to use the resources that they're providing to work with. We're working with two artists, Mandy McIntosh and Amelia Rowe. I'll introduce Amelia in a little minute. And we're working with Jonathan Charlie, who's going to do a talk about the right to the city. And he really places the occupation of Govanhill Baths right in this historical narrative coming from the Paris Commune, and looking at communities around the world that are, you know, making these positive contributions to their own area. So Mandy's we came up with the idea that we would like to do some agitprop. So Mandy's going to create an artwork which will be fly posted, put on windows, right across Govanhill during our international festival. And it's a kind of reoccupying Govanhill 20 years later. So she's looking at material from our archive and just coming up with a work that will be presented in autumn. So this is Amelia Rose work. She's going to be doing workshops with children in the park.
Hi there, everybody. Yes, so what I've been doing is we plan to run some workshops, drop-in workshops in the south side on the streets of Govanhill, using a lot of the really rather powerful imagery from the pool protest as our sort of our base. So we're doing this through stenciling. We've had a really great project already where we did a lot of stenciling in the streets around Govanhill, just to alert people even to the festival, you know, and the Occupy project. So just been going through a lot of the films from the time, a lot of the archive material. When these protests were on, I mean, I'm proudly from the south side, I'm from Shawlands anyway. I lived right at the back of the pool when the protests were first going on, so I was involved in those protests, and so it's very dear to me, and it's very nice to, years later, be involved in helping with a lot of the artwork and community work at the pool anyway. So it's a lovely sort of, it's a lovely circle for me, you know. Been going through a lot of this old archive material, pulling out some of these amazing posters, handwritten signs. There's a lot of really quite wry imagery, a lot of especially poking fun at the City Council, who were responsible for closing down the baths in the first place, and something that's still quite pertinent in 2021 because Glasgow's facing a lot of cuts to our public services, sporting facilities and libraries at the minute, and there's actually a big campaign regarding trying to save some of those assets, which are, again, like the pool, community assets that are being pulled away from the public. So the more things change, the more they stay the same, sadly. So what we're doing with this project, we're taking our stencils. They're going to be, I always have a big focus on keeping things environmentally friendly. We'll be using recycled materials and printing flags just with our drop-in workshops. I think we have 3 workshops planned, outdoors, drop-in, suitable for all ages and skill levels, making stencils, pattern making with a lot of these different icons that have been pulled from the original artworks. And so people can go away with their own flag, a little piece of protest on a stick that they take with them as they move along.
Brilliant, that's excellent. Thank you so much, Amelia. Yeah, so I'm really glad that Amelia brought up the cuts that are going on at the minute and the threatened closures of so many of the facilities in Glasgow, and it's the baths are really, the trust, you know, has come out and made a statement about this because it, you know, community ownership is not, shouldn't be a route for the City Council getting rid of assets and dumping it, the responsibility for the running on communities that don't have those resources. I'm just going to finish there. I would encourage you to go to our website. There's lots of resources there, and our Facebook page. Is the Facebook page really important for all the material that and the projects that we did during lockdown. A lot of that was online, so there was singing, there was storytelling, there was yoga, there was Tai Chi, there was arts and crafts. So you'll get all that kind of material on our website. So thanks very much. And I look forward to the next speakers, and then I think it may be Q&A at the end.
Well, thank you, Paula. That was really amazing. When I first moved to Scotland 15 years ago, I used to live right next to Govanhill Baths, and Govanhill Baths was actually the first building I went to see on an open day, an architectural open day. And it's really interesting to see how far the bars have come in those like 15 years and what has grown out of it since. And Andy still lives in this area or has just moved into this area. So it's an area very close to the architecture friend's heart, I feel. So with that, I'm just handing over to Donna from Detroit.
Good morning. It is good morning in Detroit. I know it's not good morning everywhere else, but it's kind of early in the morning here. I'm joined by my colleague, Rich Feltman. And so I'm going to spend a little bit of time really just delving into the history of Detroit and the Black history of Detroit to give you a sense of what we are working on in our community. I think it's important because when people think of Detroit, a lot of times people think of it as a failed city. People think of so many things. Maybe you think of Motown and that was when in the past, or maybe you think of cars and that was in the past. And it's as though Detroit went from having Motown and being the motor city to being a failed city. But for those of us who are living in Detroit, Detroit is a wonderful place that we are seeking to preserve. And so I want to share a little bit about the city. My family has been in Detroit for just about a century now. And when we came to Detroit, we came from Kentucky, from South Carolina, and from Alabama to a city where there was opportunity. And so my presentation is really entitled Black Detroit Matters. It is a campaign that is happening right now as we fight to preserve political influence, land ownership, and business ownership and control and opportunity for also a city that remains very poor. So when you think of Detroit, Detroit did not become a Black city like many urban cities did. The Black power in Detroit really started during the time of slavery. Detroit is just across the river from, if I can just point this out if I can, let me see. Laser pointer. Okay, this is the Detroit River right here. And the Detroit River is, Detroit is the French word for Detroit. It was founded by French. I think the British took over in 1760. But this is the river. This is Detroit, which is in Michigan. And then this is Canada. And so Ontario, Canada was the gateway to freedom. When people left slavery, they would try to get to Detroit. And there was a really strong underground railroad community and an anti-slavery society in the city of Detroit, as well as a constitutional ban on slavery in Michigan became a state. So Detroit was a place that people came long before the end of slavery and before the Great Migration. It's an interesting story in Detroit. It's one of my favorites, and it's about Thornton and Lucy Blackburn, who escaped from Kentucky to the city of Detroit, assimilated into Detroit's merchant and working community, and were detected by some people who were also from Kentucky, from Louisville. A man recognized them and they were arrested and placed on trial. When they were placed on trial, the Black community came together to free them. Two women went to visit Lucy in jail. And when they went to visit Lucy in jail, one of them exchanged clothes with her and walked out with her. And so Lucy then was taken across the river to just 1.8 miles to Canada and lived free while waiting for Thornton to also be freed. Thornton was freed, and when he was freed, he was not freed. When he was taken from the courthouse to, they were attempting him to take him from the jail to the courthouse, a mob set upon them and actually freed Thornton from jail. And when Thornton was freed, he also went to Canada. They ended up being arrested in Canada because it wasn't quite clear whether or not slaves could be returned to the United States. And actually, this is when the nation came up with a new law saying that, there was a Supreme Court decision that slaves could not be sent back to the United States if they did not commit a capital crime. And so that was the first time we realized that people could be free in Canada. They ended up moving to Montreal and starting the first Canadian cab company called The City. So that just speaks to the longstanding fight for freedom and the power of the Black community in Detroit. There was a riot, and there were many other opportunities where Black people freed themselves. But in after World War I, or just around the time of World War I, Henry Ford was offering $5 a day World War I was going on. There was a shortage of labor. And so Henry Ford started to recruit Black people to come north and work inside of the city of Detroit. And when they came to the city of Detroit, they were making the same wages as white people made in the city, which was kind of unheard of, that you would make the same exact wages, maybe not for the same job because Black people worked harder jobs, but there was an unmet demand for services. There was a growing political class, professional class. My grandfather actually came to Detroit as a doctor because he could make money as a doctor in the city of Detroit, unlike many other places. And there were many other people. There were attorneys. Eventually, there were hospitals that were formed in many other places that accommodated a growing Black middle class and a working class that could actually make a living wage. So, but there was still housing segregation in Detroit in the United States. So you had informal housing segregation through violence, neighborhood associations, and blockbusting real estate practices, and then formal housing segregation through our laws, including the Federal Housing Administration established by Franklin Delano Roosevelt as part of the New Deal, which had racial purity tests. You were not allowed to have racially mixed neighborhoods according to FHA lending guidelines, and also redlining restricted Black people to stay in certain neighborhoods, and those who were in those neighborhoods were redlined. In other words, the government drew a line and said, these are neighborhoods that are not safe for lending. So you were forced into segregated communities where the government would not lend or back loans. And then property owners were encouraged to establish restrictive housing covenants, refusing to sell to non-white people. And also the FHA would not lend or support new developments that did not include restrictive housing covenants. So you had, segregate the birth of segregated public housing and also suburbanization from Detroit. But still, there was the rise of Black Detroit. You had schools like Cass Tech High School and Wayne State University, which propelled Black people into professional classes and propelled a Black educated community. Detroit was known for strong labor union organizing and the integration of the UAW as early as the early 1940s, strong political activism, the NAACP, and accelerated Black migration. But still, residential restriction and ultimately the rise of 1943, which were caused by a lot of white resentment to the emerging Black middle class. So in Detroit, Black people were concentrated in an area known as Black Bottom and the business activity in Paradise Valley, and that was a center of Black community life. This is just an example of Hastings Street in its heyday, and you can see it was rich, full with activity. This is some of the housing that existed in Black Bottom. This is Black Bottom, people living in Black Bottom, and then our government decided that they were going to remove Black people from Black Bottom and from Paradise Valley to make way for new developments. And so this is our community destroyed. People displaced from their land. This is, just taking a community and turning it into fallow field land. And then white industrialists got together and imagined a new Detroit in that area and created what is now the Lafayette Park, which is largely consisted initially of Mies van der Rohe houses, townhouses, and apartment buildings that Black people could not afford to live into. In 1967, a lot of Black people concentrated into other neighborhoods where they were allowed to go, and there were very few. Dealing with police violence, experienced a rebellion. They fought back. And when they fought back, people said, why are they destroying their own homes? But I think it's important for us to understand their homes were destroyed by the city government and not by themselves. What they were destroying is the land they were forced to occupy after they were removed from homes that were segregated by a government that required that. But then you had the continued outward migration of white people, the growth of Black power, the election of Coleman Young, and Detroit became the Mecca for Black people in America. So while people who are not Black, who moved out of the city or who observed the city from afar, looked at Coleman Young's rise as evidence of failure and the beginning of the end, for many people, it was the beginning of the beginning. We were the largest majority Black city in the nation with the largest Black middle class in the nation. our wages were more equal to white wages in any place in the United States. And we had the highest rate of home ownership in Black business and professional class. So there was a time when Black people actually had power. And then over time, there was a continued fight to strip Black people of power that ultimately resulted in the 2012 imposition of emergency management and eventual bankruptcy in 2013, which stripped our residents of democracy, financialized all of the decision-making. There was a theft of pension funds. It's hard to imagine many Detroiters worked for the government, worked for the city of Detroit. And instead of paying Social Security, they paid into a public pension fund. They did not qualify for Social Security from the state because they paid into a public pension fund. And during the negotiations for bankruptcy, there was actually a decision to vacate those funds or thought about vacating those funds. And instead what they did was cut into the pensions to balance the budget and also to preserve the artwork in the Detroit Institute of Arts. We lost ownership of the water department and culture institutions. The state began controlling and still controls our finances. There was destruction of schools, water shutoffs became normalized in our community with over 40,000 water shutoffs in 2014. 1 out of 3 homes in our community was foreclosed on for property tax, property tax arrears. And we recently learned that 600 million, Detroiters were overcharged $600 million in property taxes in that time frame. There were mass demolitions, loss of affordable housing, and gentrification. And so Black people no longer really have the same kind of power, influence, and control of our government as we once had. And this is the result. You can look at the top picture in 2011 and the bottom picture a couple years later and see destruction of housing. This is the same street and it's Google time zone, but it gets worse because this is 2013. And in the bottom picture, that is 2000 and is it 15? I'm sorry, I can't see that slide, the bottom slide. But you can see what's happening in our community, 2015. That's one street and it's happening all over Detroit. Now, remember, Detroit was this home of homeowners, and we went from being a predominantly homeowner city to a predominantly renter city in this time frame. Here's another street scene in Detroit over time in 2009 and 2018. 2009 and 2018. And that's where we come to majority Black Detroit Matters. So I'm going to focus right now. This is a campaign by one of our partner organizations, the Detroit People's Platform, in a neighborhood where I now live and also work, which is the Jefferson Chalmers neighborhood. In 2018, the city of Detroit decided to do planning inside of this neighborhood, and you can see that there was institutional destruction of this neighborhood and ownership inside. And the residents in this community began to feel like their ownership was at stake. And so the residents engaged in a majority Black Detroit Matters campaign because we can do more than demolish homes. Residents are coming together to actually acquire and rehab some of the homes in the community for ownership by Black Detroiters. This is a block club, United We Stand, Divided We Fall, a block club that is asserting its power. And you can see this beautiful craftsman bungalow that is abandoned because of tax foreclosure. And the question is, who's going to get this home? Is it going to be a Detroiter, or will it be somebody coming in and seeking to gentrify our community and take over this home? This is a great story. There's a local young man who has been raising money through crowdfunding and raised enough money that he's purchased his former liquor store and he's turning it into a neighborhood grocery store, Black owned. It will be the first Black owned grocery store in the city of Detroit for many, many years. So it's still a liquor store now. You can see that there is the dumpster next to it. So he's in the process of developing it, but right inside of our neighborhood, nested inside of our community, there will be a Black owned grocery store, which is great because we have so many community farms inside of the neighborhood that he can sell locally produced goods. Here's just a house, and it's one of the projects that we've been emphasizing, and that is helping residents acquire vacant lots next to their homes. It's a side lot program. And this person has purchased lots next to their home, and they're actually growing things in their yard. So we have a big food production movement that says that people should, we want to be a food sovereign city that is freed from local grocery stores and international food conglomerates. Here's another project. Actually, this entire street is really exciting. It's Manistique Street. And when I take off, Rich is going to talk about a project on Manistique Street, but this is the Creative Empowerment Farms. This is a project that was developed in partnership with the Charles Wright African American History Museum, which is the second largest in the nation. It was actually the largest in the nation until the Smithsonian built a larger one in DC. But this provides solar power. It's a solar powered movie theater that also incorporates green infrastructure and some farming down the street from it. And let me see, I got a couple more pictures. This is a park that my organization helped to raise funds to redevelop, and we've put marshlands back into that park, helping to increase the habitat for flora and fauna, and also address stormwater flooding. This is 3 empty lots that my organization redeveloped as a Rainscape Learning Lab. There's an elementary school across the street, and we actually helped another organization reclaim a vacant home that is now being used as a community center. But this is a demonstration project to reclaim and repurpose earth while at the same time addressing stormwater drainage issues. And this is a mural developed by our young people, as well as an outdoor classroom with tree stumps. And I end now inviting Rich to talk about this project right here, which is Freedom Farms.
Thank you so much to the organizers and this global local connections that you are nurturing and maturing. And thank you, Donna, for that very amazing overview of Detroit history and where we're going. And I'm gonna just share a few of the current activities and initiatives that exemplifies for Detroit so much of why Detroit matters across, for Detroiters, for the region, and for the globe. And just very briefly, I do not have my family did not move to Detroit in the Great Migration. I came as an activist in 1970, have been labor activist, worked in a plant and do a lot of community work, visionary organizing, we call it, at the James and Grace Lee Boggs Center. It's been an honor and a gift to work with people like Donna and so many others, a city that has more than 1,500 community gardens, almost 20,000 people involved in the community gardens, and is now on the verge of creating a citywide food co-op under the leadership of the Detroit Black Food Security Network. I'm gonna share 3 things. 1 about freedom growers, 2 about a community land trust, and 3 about Solutionaries Network. My first sentence is Detroit, as Donna said, is a movement city that reached its highest level of militancy in 1967 with the rebellion, but it was not a revolution. And since that time, people in Detroit, growing numbers of people have been working to answer that question of how do we transform ourselves and create new forms of governing that's very local, based on participatory democracy and local community building and sustainability. So currently, Feed 'em Freedom Growers is a group of Wayne Curtis and Myrtle Thompson Curtis. Wayne was an early member of the Black Panther Party, an artist, Vietnam veteran, and Myrtle Thompson Curtis was born and raised on the Eastside, and she's the mother, wise one, grandmother of an amazing initiative. They started about between 12, 13 years ago, and their theme is for Feed and Freedom growers is grow a garden, grow a community. And it's all about creating liberated zones. How do you heal people? And they have programs such as a community garden where every Saturday, 10, 20, 30 people come and work in the garden. They have a marketplace across the street from their home in this garden. They have a 291 house, a community house, because the city has abandoned its commitment to community, to recreation centers, to childcare centers, to libraries over the last 30 years. And people like Myrtle are creating, and her daughter Monique and others are creating these community houses to both replace and respirit the community and the neighborhood. Myrtle, Feed and Freedom, has an art program currently going on, for example. And right now, it historically for 3 or 4 years has involved young people coming together, because Wayne is also an artist. And they basically learn art, do art, create art, and then they sell their art. And to see the smiles on the young kids when they're selling their art is pretty phenomenal. And the pride they have in the families, the pride the families have. And so it's not uncommon on a Saturday to see people do Myrtle leading a healthy cooking program, because there's such a high level of diabetes. And for all of us, the need for health and healthy eating. Conversation on how do you struggle against police violence and violence within the community through creating peace zones for life. And thirdly, how do you have these art programs going on? So it's not uncommon for those things to be happening. And then during the summer, there's much more mentorship and much more involvement of young people in both cleaning up and building parks and working at the community house and on the garden, which they're getting unleashed, that Donna and ECN and Feed and Freedom have partnered with. But Myrtle and Wayne are very clear that this is how you struggle against racial capitalism. This is how you struggle to heal. This is how we struggle to create a safe space where leadership emerges, and it's multi-generational and intergenerational, because that's what happens when people are digging in the land together. Secondly, so I want to move next to, I think Donna, I met Donna maybe a couple of years ago, and it just brought smiles to my face as we talked about our histories and our relationships of our family, who knew Jimmy and Grace Boggs, who I've worked with for so many years. And it's been a treat as we struggled against Chrysler Corporation, bringing in jobs, but not having any commitment to the community about sustainability. And we worked together during that period, and then met and figured out how to continue that work. And we created something called the Solutionaries Collective, which is a network, a newsletter and a network at this point, just emerging. Don't want to give it any maturity at this point, but working towards it. And the first issue came out just recently that involves people who are doing solar, wind technology, with a commitment of education, training, and work creation. On Myrtle's Feed and Freedom land, they are working with Carlos Neobach, windmill based on upscaling recycled materials to create a windmill that will take water from the canal, because as Donna mentioned, the city is surrounded by lots of water. It's the Great Lakes. And one of the reasons white folks and corporate folks want Detroit back is that 82% of the fresh water in the United States is located in the Great Lakes, and 22% of all the fresh water in the world is the Great Lakes. And Detroit is in the middle of that Great Lakes. This is not just an old, let's take back the land. This is like where we're going to be in the 21st century around water and the struggle. And that's why that emergency manager came in, which was a coup d'etat, and the bankruptcy, which was a takeover by the banks, would have been an IMF takeover. It was not the United States language. So the Solutionaries Collective is a network moving towards a coalition of doing these kind of workshops. Maker spaces and are part of the conversation as well. And the third is the community land trust that has been going on, emerging for the last 3 or 4 years, also on the east side. This is all on the east side, a city that has almost one third of the 150 square miles of open land, or abandoned buildings, or abandoned factories. So we have an opportunity that's pretty challenges us because of all the pain, but also provides so much opportunity because of the space available. Detroit once had a population of 1.85 million people and now has less than 700,000. So you can picture the space that's available for us to create. So over on the east side, not far from Eastside Community Network and Feed 'em Freedom, maybe about 10-minute little car ride, 5-minute car ride, is a neighborhood that people who are born and raised in the neighborhood came up from during the Great Migration, longtime residents, ministers, former incarcerated longtime residents. A small group of us, I want to emphasize a small group of us, came together and have so far purchased 18 lots, in the process of purchasing another 18 to 25 lots and having 2 stages of development. At this stage, it's about healing the land, putting in raised beds, making sure it's universally designed for people with and without disabilities, and that everything we're doing will include that, because disability justice is also on the agenda now across our country and across the world, we hope. The community land, so we're planting gardens, raised beds, stage, building a stage, planting fruit trees, a small vineyard of grapes for making wine for the church, and mostly it's built on trust. The word community land trust to me is about trust and about relationship building. And we've met every week for the last 4 years. We're now at the stage of purchasing the land. And then the goal and the vision is, after we gain control of the land from the city, from the Detroit Land Bank that Donna referenced, and we've raised sufficient amount of money to do all this, we will create an eco-village that's locally sustainable, that will have community-based housing, where people from the neighborhood school, from a neighborhood workplace, from the neighborhood will be able to design and build their own homes, and then it's off the grid. So people don't have to spend 10 hours a month figuring out how they're gonna pay their electric bill. So it's a dream, but Detroit is a dreaming city and it's a movement city. And it's just an honor to be here and share this with you. Unfortunately, I will get off this phone call and not have a lot of time because I'm on the way to a graduation out of town and got to get on one of those weird planes. So it's an honor to meet everybody. Thank you. Thank you, Donna, for this time.
Thanks, Rich.
Thank you, Donna, and thank you, Rich. So Detroit is a city that I have been fascinated with for many years, for many of the reasons that you have mentioned. And it's the only city in the US I really return to every time I'm in the US. And I think Detroit, it's a city I feel that doesn't only have resilience, but also like defiance, which is even more important than resilience, I feel. Because there are so many things stacked against the residents in Detroit, but Detroit just does not give up. It just fights back, and it has all of those wonderful, beautiful projects that come out of this, which is really exciting to hear, I feel. So thank you very much for everything you've already shared, Donna. And finally, last but not least, I'm going to hand over to Nita and her team to hear from Kolkata.
First, I would like to ask my teammates to introduce themselves before I start. So that would be nice. Ishita, can you come up, please, and introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. My name is Ishita. I'm a visual communication designer based in Dubai, but home for me is Calcutta, India. Firstly, I would like to thank the entire Architecture Fringe team for this beautiful platform to showcase our greatly misinterpreted country. Last year, I was in Calcutta on a holiday that stretched for 6 months thanks to the pandemic. This was also when the super cyclone Amphan caused billions of dollars worth of destruction. Having experienced the nightmare firsthand from the comforts of my urban home, it was only the next morning that I grasped the severity of the disaster. Huge trees, hundreds of years old, lay lifeless around me. But worse still were the conditions of the people floating aimlessly on the streets. Most now homeless, if you counted their plastic sheet covers as homes in the first place. The double disasters had marginalized an already marginalized strata of my community. On a closer look, I realized that these people were actually known to me before. Before they were faceless street vendors that lived on the side of the road. But the disasters helped me see them as more than that. They were no longer village riffraff crowding our cities, but human beings making a living by providing us skills, labor, and services, most of which were taken away during the pandemic. My motivation for this project at hand is to bring the stories of these people to the forefront, to communicate the urgent need for a better quality of life for them, for their own space, for them to be recognized as skilled workers and an integral part of the Indian society. So thank you again, Architecture Fringe, for giving us this opportunity. Over to you, Anurupa.
Yeah, thank you. Hello, everyone. At first, I would like to thank the entire team of Architecture Fringe to introduce me and such important project. I'm Anurupa Roy. I'm a social worker from Shantiniketan near to Kolkata, West Bengal. And from last 5 years, I have worked with many international organizations covering issues like livelihood promotion, WASH program, adolescent hygiene, along with HIV and sexually transmitted infection. Also worked on women empowerment through land rights, basically to create awareness and sensitize them regarding the land documents and how to secure their land encroached from the zamindars, relatives, land brokers, etc. I have also done capacity building of self-help group members on women land literacy in association with government body. My involvement in this project is to observe and collect the data and information from the uh, targeted street vendors and prepare a combined status report on their land use status. So I'm really looking forward to it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anurupa. Uh, uh, Thank you. These are my two very young colleagues, and it's fun to work with young people now. So first, I would like to thank Lian, Andian, and Raina, really because they've given me a purpose in this COVID pandemic and the cyclone times. And times were really bad, and I just didn't know what to do. And then Lian kept pestering me about this project, and I knew nothing about because I'm not a social worker, and I have never worked with people directly. I'm a conservation architect working on urban conservation. Although indirectly, I always worked on the people living around my area, but I never really interacted with people per se. They were for me just a human mass that surrounded, encroached upon most of the heritage sites that I worked on. So this was the first time that I got an opportunity to really interact one-on-one with the people. And I started looking at people. Really, it was a dehumanizing thing for me because I had never looked at the people as humans, really. So, and when I looked closer, I really found a lot of human faces with similar human problems and actual problems that some of them which I could change as an architect, or at least even not change, I could bring up those issues as an architect. So I'm going to present here not only those people that I found which is an issue in India, but it's unlike what I saw in the United States, where there is a racial discrimination, or you talk of Glasgow with so many communities from all over the world. In India, the basic difference is between the upper class and the lower class, or rather the served and the service providers. And that is really the basic difference. So what I'm going to present is just some faces of the people who are who make the city and the who make an Indian city more vibrant as a collective thing. If you see, there are four dots at the bottom. There's a red, there's a blue, there's a yellow, and there's a green. These will point to issues. They will just be randomly put. The red will tell you the problem areas that the city faces. The blue will tell you whether the person we are talking about is skilled or unskilled. Blue means skilled. The yellow will give you the cost of the material that the vendor is selling, and usually nothing is more than £3, I realized. And green tells you how eco-friendly these systems are that we are working with in India. So I'll talk about the streets, and the streets of India really make India what it is. So you can say we can celebrate the vibrancy and dynamics of urban space in Indian cities, but they are also often the most talked about and hated segments, and people try to use a broom and clean the city and make it look quite lifeless. But this is a novelty, of course, and even in pandemic times, you can see it's quite bustling. It would be full during non-COVID times. And I have put on the right-hand side the cost of berries, which is like £2 kg. And on the left, I put an earth eco-friendly sign that most of these things are organic, coming from the nearby villages, small towns. Everything is disposable. So when we look at these pictures, let us see what are issues that really need to be looked at. Not like a congested area, but a place which is full, which works with very low income, with very you need to have one of my Scottish young friends told me what I like most about India is that you in a pound you just need a pound in your pocket and you can actually eat the whole day as much as you want. And this is what is one of the things. Second is the idea that most of these things are organic, they are sold over there, they are fresh, and they are disposable, so they are really eco-friendly. So I'll just run you through some of these things that we see on the streets, which is an everyday affair. These are vegetables that you can see. I've put some cost of brinjals, which is 60 paisa per kg. The pence, not pesa, pence. And then these are water supply people who are giving water to all these shops and even to their houses as they move along. The mangoes are on one side, and on the other side, a local van selling bakeries. The neighborhood, but because of the COVID, I could not really go out into the neighborhood. So I just took my own neighborhood, which is the Southern Avenue. This is as I step out of my house, I realize that in India, everybody, you cannot go out of your house without the number of people you are being served by. On the left is my house help who does the cleaning, cooking, and most of the jobs. And the person sitting on the right is the person who takes all my newspapers and all my plastic goods that we for recycling. And he takes everything for 15 pence per kg. This is the street on the left. This is where I live. We live in a upmarket area. On the left is the road, and on the right is the broad footpath, which will soon be occupied by vendors. This is the corner, which is where most of the shops and the street vendors sit, because that's where a lot of people cross. And this is the area which is the crossroads, again, which is the busy part of the whole city. You can see on the right would be the lake, and these are some bus stands that we go along. And you will see people sitting all along the lake doing something or the other. Calcutta is famous for something called adda and rockbaji, which means to say that people just hang out on the street for the pleasure and for the love of it. And all of us do that in the morning and in the evening where it's really cold. So the footpaths really become the outdoor cafes, and people bring their own chairs, and they just sit and they just chat. Our transport is cycle rickshaws, which we see here. There are also hand carts, hand-drawn rickshaws, and we also have cars. It's not that we live in a world which is not automated. We're a rich country. Coming to the street vendors, uh, I have just picked up some very strange street vendors. On the left, of course, is our taxi driver, no work because of lockdown. And on the right is a person who's selling tobacco, which they chew. And you can get for 5 pence, 10 grams to chew for a whole day. This is honey. This man is selling honey right from the beehive. So you can see the beehive on top. And he would be selling, again, honey fresh from his own ground. Now, these are all skilled people, and they're not just riffraffs on the road. On the left is how we get our gas, cooking gas. And on the right is how we get our fish. These are coconuts being sold on either cycles or hand-drawn carts. This is a strange thing called sattu, which is dried, powdered, roasted chickpea powder, which is eaten by most people from North India, and it is just mixed with water, and you can have it for 10 pence per glass. It's supposed to have high protein content. This is a fish seller, and these are all skilled people. They catch the fish and they come and sell it, all fresh, all from the market, and we are buying them right from here on the curb. This is our bike mechanic, and you can get your mobike repaired over here. And for a puncture, it's just 35 pence, and he will repair it for you. By evening, he's gone. These are our fruit sellers, and you can keep reading the rates as we go along. And this is a person who sells tea and other stuff. Now, this is a red spot. I need to explain the red spot. Although he's skilled and he sells the tea for 6 pence per cup, but the red spot is a major problem because it produces a lot of plastic. And if you go, one of my friends was telling me that these all smaller packs are actually cheaper to buy than bigger bottles of, like, say, coffee. So these would be something which would be very small packs, which anybody can buy with low income or somebody who wants something less. But it ends up producing a lot of plastic. These are some of the, Calcutta is a very artistic city, and you can see that anything is painted up by these local street artists. These are sweepers and cleaners who keep cleaning the place endlessly. This goes and it is then collected by these people. On the right is the main person who's going to take our garbage. On the center are two people. One is the cleaner who was actually cleaning, and the one on the left is actually a manual scavenger. And on the extreme left is the woman who would take all the plastic away. Now, that is illegal and it is not allowed, but still we have a lot of manual scavenging doing. And this is where it goes, or right on our footpath, where it is sorted very carefully. And I talked to the old man, the whole street right from the wooden sections to the plastic sections to paper to plastic bags and plastic bottles. He said it would all be sold for 15 pence per kg. So he does this sorting, and he would take this all away and to be recycled and resold. This is where it goes, and the whole thing, and this is a red dot because here the garbage is not at all segregated. These are also activities that you can see on the road. You can get a shave and a haircut for just 40 pence, and you can get your clothes washed. I don't know how much it costs because I've never given my clothes there. These are meals on the go. You can get a full meal for 25 pence. On the left is something that we call muri, moshla muri, a savory that we buy. On the right is tele bhaja, which is fried Indian savories, which we all love. All on the left is again dried. Now these are dried savories. On the right is something which is an egg roll. Another red spot which says that these areas actually produce a lot of garbage and a lot of untreated dirt and services areas. On the left is a very interesting shop because it's a very small space. So on the ground, they're selling tea. On top, they sell cigarettes and pan. I don't know if you know pan or not. On the right, they are selling singaras. And if you don't know pan, this is what it is. They are betel leaf with betel nuts and lime and cardamom and many other spices that go into it. So it's like a small spice piece that you can eat to as a digestive. And it costs you 10 pence per piece. Now, each of these service vendors also have a service provider. Now, this man's job is just simply to collect water from a local hand pump in the areas. There are several hand pumps in the area, and I used to wonder. I seriously didn't know where he went and who used that water. And then I found this person who used to wash our cars. Is that the water is given to them, and then so this man on the right goes around washing cars and taxis for anybody for 20 pence per car wash. This is the famous sweets of Calcutta, the mishti, and on the right is the man who would supply them with the milk, and that's buffalo milk that he would get. So it costs 50 pence per liter for buffalo milk. Now this is the thing that he used, and what struck me is, if you can see next to his chain is his small oil oil can, which he would keep oiling his cycle as he moved around. Everything is very local, very economical, and very, very eco-friendly. And that's what I found, that things that we were dead against is actually what the world is tending towards. On the left is the man who gets the stuff from the groceries. He doesn't charge us any money. It's free. The delivery for groceries to our homes are free. On the right is the person who gives us milk and water, distilled water, if you want some. And this is how it comes to our house. This is my footstep. So you would have the newspaper and the milk deposited right on your footstep. Nowhere to go. And this is where it comes from, our newspaper. The man on the left is the one who is the main vendor. Then the man in the cycle goes and gives it to every house. And then there are boards which can actually, where they can be put up and for the common people, and they all read the newspaper as you go along. The whole thing is very local, very simple, and very eco-friendly. There's no use of any energy, any extra cost. Everything is recycled and everything is absolutely economical and local. On the left is a security guard, and you can see that reading newspapers is a big thing in Calcutta. Now, these are another things that happen on our street very frequently, and those are temples. On the left is a temple street. The same footpath walkway has been covered with a small tin roof, which of course causes a lot of encroachments. And on the right is a man who's singing hymns to the god as he stands in front of the temple. There are many shrines. Every corner has a shrine, and our donation is 1 pence, which is 1 rupee. So that's good enough that you put in front of there as a donation. Now, where do these people stay? That was something that one needed to look around. And you just have to look in the same quarters, and you see all the back alleys and the derelict buildings is where the people stay. Some of them actually stay on the footpaths. And this is what we called encroachments, squatters. And then you have, slowly these areas start getting something like an encroached area. And this whole community is a community of cleaners and sweepers who keep the area clean. This is now a shanty which has developed from these quarters. And this boy, I follow him quite a lot. And you can see he plays football. So for me, the biggest issue here, more than the encroachment, was the fact that there is a lost childhood. I have 2 children of my own. And when I saw this boy play here, it really touched me that the life over here, the quality of these people was really not very good as I thought. More children you see because most of the time the men and women are out working. So you can see just down my road is this whole area which has come up, where the quality of life of the service providers, all of them who come to our house, whether to clean or to give vegetables or fruits or keep our area so beautifully clean, themselves lived in such pathetic situations. Just looking at the quality of how these constructions and these temporary structures on the road were built. Now this is a shrine, and on the right is the priestess, so to speak, who takes care of that. So anything that comes in the donation plate, she will take it and go away. And her house is really interesting. I mean, it's a temporary thing. You can just pick it up and go. And she has a water, she has a food, and she has a brick for a pillow. At night, you can see that they actually chain their stuff. And on the right, when it rains, the barber puts a plastic sheet on top of it, and that's his a shop. Nothing, no expenditure except the fact that he himself offers the services. And I think I pay 750 rupees, which is about, and this person would pay about 35 rupees to get a shave and a haircut. The structures of these structures are made from local stuff, very local, very sometimes even from the recycled man who sells them, and the whole cart or the whole house would be made from recycled material. This is where our clothes are ironed for 5 pence per piece. This is a man's place where his shop, and on the right is where he makes a small fire and puts his iron on top of it, and then irons our clothes. And he even sleeps in the same bed at night. When you see it on the other side, you will see on the left that his clothes are hanging. This is when the shop is closed, and you would see all his things hanging on top of it. On the right is how they would close and lock their belongings, and nothing really gets stolen ever. The drinking water situation is quite peculiar, because in India, it is considered a matter of great charity to actually provide for drinking water. So on the left, you will see many of these things put up place to place for people to actually drink for free. And on the right-hand side is the man who was carrying the water, filling it for the shops. And that is where they get their water supply from, because there are no supply lines for these street vendors. The local hand pumps are used by these people who live in these areas. And on the right, you can see that this is a locality. On the left is the same man who was breaking up who was recycling the material. And there are no services like drinking water. They're using public toilets and public services for that, which is really what is causing the problem in the urban areas. Now, who are these people? If you look at them, who are these people who come here? And if I take myself as a consumer, where I put then I am being served by vendors or by service providers, who in turn are being served by suppliers and service providers and producers. And if you see the way it comes, that the cities are actually being supported by people from the suburban areas and the producers coming from the village. So it's the center line, if you see the Indian lifeline, which is a migrant and a floating population, which comes from villages. 65% of the population moves from the villages into the 35% of cities. And that is what forms the main service class. And this is whom we term as the urban poor. And this is the urban poor, really, that one wants to clean away every time an issue happens. This is the people that is targeted, that let's clean our city, let's remove them, not realizing that it is the lifeline. You remove this section and you will not have anybody cleaning your houses or your streets, or getting your vegetables, or ironing your clothes, or washing your clothes, or providing you with your daily supplies, or groceries, or milk, or newspaper, or cooking for you, or I think nothing. I think Indians from the upper middle class families like us are actually quite useless. Without, personally, I have at least 10 to 15 people who serve me on a daily basis. So if I'm left to myself, I'm really absolutely no good. And yet it is these people that we want to really clean every time something happens. When we have a cyclone, this is what happens in the newspapers, that all the vendors, their things are rotting because everything is local, everything is is really going to rot. So the rains come and the houses are washed away, the streets are washed away, their shops are washed away, and their wares completely are absolutely destroyed. The COVID happens, there was no work, we had a lockdown, and all these people had to move back, sometimes walking for 30 to 50 kilometers back to the villages where they came from to work for the city. When suddenly the government realized, oh, if everybody goes to the villages, who's going to run our mills? Who is going to run our jute mill? Who's going to run our sugar mill? Who's going to give us vegetables? And the housewives were so concerned, who's going to clean our dishes? And then there was a sudden stop. And then they said, no, 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 we are not going to let you go back. So the migrants were really stuck between the city and the homes, and several died. It was a pitiable condition. And every time architects talk and every time the people talk, this is what happens is that if you want to make a city beautiful, you have to remove and bulldoze the slums, not realizing that they are really the lifeline of our city. If you remove all the slums, you remove all the people, there is no one to really serve the city. So the question then arises, whom does the urban land belong to? The served or the service providers? So is the upper class more important or the service providers more important? The city cannot survive without either. So we as architects should try to improve the quality of life of the street vendors by including their needs in the master plans and provide proper housing and adequate services. They have to be built into a system of design and not really looked as somebody who is disposable, because they are not disposable. It is like the yin and the yang, the black and the white, the dark and the darkness and the lightness, that we form a unity. And that's what an Indian city really is. So thank you. And I'm going to take on a very small section, which is called the Taste of Calcutta, because I cannot leave you without showing you some of the beautiful street food that is sold, made by my young colleague, Anurupa, but she decided not to talk about it. So this is puchka, which is small, very small, I don't know what you call them, but you can see what they are. And then what you do is that you can stuff them with potatoes and boiled potatoes and onions and all the spices and dip it in spicy water and have it. And it's about as big as your mouth is. So, I mean, we take it in one go. And when you come to India or Calcutta, we'll have you let a go at this puchka. It's really good. This is our chai. Leon wanted to know how we made the chai, so we've just made a whole thing. Europeans usually use long leaf tea, but Indians use Assam CTC tea, which is much stronger for passion. You can mix milk and tea, ginger and cardamoms and some more spices with a lot of milk and boil it till it becomes really thick, and that is chai. Then we have jhalmuri, which is very interesting, which is puffed rice, but you mix all of these other stuff like boiled potatoes and onions and coriander and salt and red chilies, and I think you put chutney, and then you put lemon, and you mix it together, and that's really, really our this is our dieting food. And this is Tejio Tele Bhaja, not that dieting food, but that's evening food. When you're really hungry, come home from work, you take brinjals or aubergines and dip them in batter and deep fry them. And that's really tasty too. So I've got some recipes over here. So if you want to take a screenshot, you can get all the recipes. And the last but not the least are the egg rolls, the famous egg rolls of Calcutta, which is just a paratha, and you put in a lot of stuffings and put so this on the left is what you would need, a pan, and roll out a dough and put egg on it, and then put some onions and chicken, and you can have any other thing you want to put in it, and just make a roll out of it, and that's the famous egg roll. So thank you. That was Calcutta for you. I hope I didn't bore you, but I hope we can continue to think about Calcutta or India, not as a place which is which really is something where only poor people stay, but this is a place where you actually have very skilled workers giving us a lot of facilities for very low prices. And if you have 100 rupees or £1 in your pocket, you're a rich man in Calcutta for at least a day. Thank you.
Thank you, Anita, Ishita, and Anarupa. That looked really delicious. I haven't had lunch yet. And it's lunchtime here in the UK just now. That was really inspiring. So Calcutta is the only place I have not been to yet, but I clearly need to visit as soon as we can get out here again. I'm slightly aware of time, so I'm immediately handing over to my colleague Reina, who's going to manage the questions.
Hi, thank you so much for all of those presentations. They were really, really fascinating. I'm going to limit my questions to only a few per group, just to allow for time for the audience to ask questions as well. So if you do have questions, please post them in chat. So I'm going to start with Govanhill Baths, and I want to know, was there much community ownership in Glasgow at the time, back in 2001? Or do you think Govanhill Baths probably paved the way for further community organisation? And I also want to know if, well, yeah, we'll go with that, just community ownership at the time and organisation.
It's certainly something that's been growing, and because I think there's quite a lot of conflict around this issue, because it's not something that should kind of be forced on a community as a way of the city council getting rid of assets. If a community comes together and wants to fight for the ownership of land or a facility or a service, yeah, that's great. But certainly in the context of the moment, with all these threatened closures in Glasgow, what we are really saying is, while the rhetoric is that it gives more power to the community, what actually happens is you have to, of course, fundraise to get money, and a lot of the funds that fund the projects that Govanhill Baths Community Trust do comes from Scotland-wide or UK-wide grant-giving bodies. So in actual fact, the power goes further away from Govanhill, from Glasgow City Council to the national government or funds and trusts throughout the UK. I'm not sure, does that answer your question?
Yeah, just a wee follow-up. So then, do they then, the funding bodies, then I take it they get further, or they get more control or more say in what happens over the community? Well,
if your projects don't fit their criteria, then you don't get funding. So then it's difficult to do projects if they don't have resources. One thing that's for the trust, because so much work that the trust, I mean, the Save Our Pool campaign, of course, was voluntary, and you know, was really successful because of that diversity of people involved. You know, I was saying, so unemployed to professional to academic to, and as the trust is growing, and because the programs, especially the wellbeing programs and the rags to riches, the upcycling programs, are so needed and so successful, then it has been able to attract funds for these, and now the trust actually employs over 30 people. You know, and that's changed. You know, only maybe 5 or 6 years ago, there would only have been one full-time employee. Most of the people are employed on a part-time basis, and it's difficult. It's project funding, so they're employed for a specific project. So it's very difficult because there's no guarantee that funding will come in. So it doesn't stop the trust being ambitious and applying for funds or doing projects which brings in income. but it can make it tricky.
So I'm going to ask a question to Donna about Detroit, and we're most interested in, I mean, well, we're interested in many aspects of your presentation, but largely, what vigilance do you feel one must have against the same tactics deployed against people which have been deployed against in the past? So, one example, how would that Black grocery store survive strategically, for example?
Well, it's really difficult. First of all, it is housed within a neighborhood. A lot of times that means that it's going to be difficult to attract customers. It's going to be difficult to purchase things at a competitive rate and sell them at a competitive rate, because you have a lot of independent grocery stores that are organized through a largely Arab-owned conglomerate called Spartan Foods. And they kind of squeeze out Black grocers, which is why we don't have many. They just can't compete with prices when you have people who are purchasing, collectively. We don't have any large grocery stores in Detroit, but we do have a Whole Foods here. And I don't know if you guys know about Whole Foods, but it's upscale food at a, and so it's not affordable to many Detroiters. And then the independent grocers, a lot of them are not really high quality. So I suppose if what we're able to do is build visibility of the store, and also just have people understand that you're purchasing locally and you may have to pay a premium for that, locally produced goods, we can generate some opportunity. I don't think it's tried before in our community that you have a grocery store really focused on local, local foods. And we haven't had as much local foods in the past as we have now. The food sovereignty issue and the number of farms that Rich referenced is really making a difference in terms of opportunity. I think one of the challenges about healing from the past and not repeating past mistakes is we tend to name things new things in America. So every 5 years we reinvent the wheel. It's like, okay, we used to have what they call a slum clearance. You have urban renewal. And now you have this blight removal. And blight removal sounds really cool. It's like, oh, we're removing blight. That's a good thing. And we have spent more money. I think we just raised $250 million in bond money to remove blight. But what blight removal means in one community, for example, we're trying to purchase homes to rehab the homes. These are brick homes that are in pretty good condition. And so we want to acquire them and rehab them and sell them to low-income people, because it's so much cheaper to purchase and rehab than it is to build something new. But these homes are owned by the Detroit Land Bank Authority, which is a quasi-governmental entity. Well, since the mayor has raised all of this bond money to demolish homes, he wants to find as many vacant homes as he can to feed the demolition machine. Why? Because he's paying contractors $20,000, at least $20,000 each to demolish these homes. And the benefit of that is these are all campaign contributors. So the demolition machine ends up being more important than housing people. So rather than saying, let's take this $250 million and figure out how we can house people, we repeat the mistakes of the past by just clearing slums. And it kind of connects to what Anita was talking about when she talked about the desire to just clean out where people are. I don't think that we consider them service workers. These are, but they are low-income people, low-income workers inside of our community. And public policy creates this concentration of poverty. And then public policy says, oops, you're in the way, let's clean them out. And so I think that we really have to work more collectively and more intentionally to help people understand what's happening, help people see the parallels between the past and now, and demand different things of our government.
Thank you so much. I'm now going to move on to Nita and ask, in not quite your last slide, but your last slide before all the lovely food, which made me miss India quite a bit. You spoke about architects designing spaces or designing the uses or the lives of the service providers into our spaces. I wanted to know if you have any particular advice in terms of that and what you might suggest we could do.
Actually, what happened was that water initially was not a problem. So water, people never thought of water. And then we started having a water problem. So what happened was that the government decided that every building needed to have a water recharge system. So, we started having every now, it's a part of our bylaws that you have to have a water recharge system. Then the cars increased and the housings increased. So then the government said, no, that there's no place for parking. So every building really needs to provide for the basement parking, and the big parking lots come up. So my idea is, my suggestion is that since we all anyways have these service providers living in and around us, we should have something which was included in our housing. But the prime land costs, because of the prime land cost, what they give are servant quarters, which is a very small unit, barely as big as our kitchen. And they expect a family of 5 to live into it. Now, what happens is that because of that, the rooms are used for storage, and the people just play out on the streets. So the idea is that every time you talk to the government, that is what they say, that we provided for housing. So either the housing is too small to accommodate a family, or they don't have services, so they use public services, or they would give them housing so far away from their working land that they cannot commute. They don't have the money to commute, because commuting is very expensive, and a cycle rickshaw cannot go that distance. So metros and buses are quite expensive to move into. So what happens is that their housing strategy never really works. So if we were to design, as we did a parking lot, if a car can occupy so much space, then I'm sure a family of 5 can be really accommodated within all the cities. I mean, the terraces are free. You can build another unit over there and take people, or the ground floor can be kept for a multi-use, where you can have the shops, the bazaar streets, another thing. And that's what I'm hoping to work on in this project, is to get ideas for such sort of an integrated system.
Thank you. So speaking to everyone and listening to all your presentations, it seems like it's always the community, or in all of these situations, it's the community that is supporting and providing for the rest of the community. And I don't think in anyone's presentation I got the impression that the government, the local council, or any of the bodies of authority seem to be helping in any way. They seem to be a hindrance more than anything. How would, this is a question for all three, how did all of you overcome the barriers put up by the authorities in each of your countries or places?
In Detroit, I think there was this fear of speaking out, because if you speak out and you make different demands, then you're seen as a troublemaker, and you might be denied funding. You might be denied any type of political access. But I think also in our community, the government went too far in making certain demands. And also, we had the benefit of having the horrendous president of Donald Trump really building awareness that, wait a minute, these things might be bad, and we need to fight back. How did this even happen? And so our foundation community, philanthropies, started coming in and saying, let's work more effectively together. There are people who were just going along to get along, who became aware that we have to work together. And so we formed in Detroit this entity called Detroit 21, which is all 21 community development organizations that are really, relatively large, came together and said, we're going to make a shared demand on our city. And if we all stand together, none of us can be punished. But if one of us, violates this, then we all can be punished. And so we stood together. And it created this awareness that, wait a minute, we need to listen to these folks. And it also built in us a sense of empowerment that we can do this on other things. So I think that sometimes you have to find the moment when people are willing to try new things and are willing to take risky stances. And that is when you can act. And other than that, you find yourself organizing in the background and just preparing for the day and trying to help motivate people to understand that there will come a time when we will be heard.
I'm really interested to know what you meant by the community went too far in making demands? Because by the sounds of it, all of these demands are beneficial to the community.
The government went too far.
Fair.
The mayor of Detroit, we don't even have time, but when you foreclose on 1 out of 3 homes, when you overtax people by $600 million, when you are creating a lead paint crisis, and even in Flint, Michigan, if people have heard about the fact that our government in Flint, Michigan connected to a poisoned water source and created a lead crisis among children and families in a community, not to mention all of the other toxins in that water. When the government goes far enough where people get poisoned or where people lose their possessions, and I showed you what the streets look like, right? So people have been living in these communities, and all of a sudden this home that I own has lost all of its value because the government has foreclosed on all these homes near me and is now tearing them down. And I used to live in a nice neighborhood and have neighbors, and now I live among rubble. That's going to impact whether or not people are willing to get involved in whatever kind of fight that you want to have. So I think that sometimes people who have power go too far, and then the people who don't come together to try to take some of it back. At least that's been the cycle of progress in our community. So activism is now kind of in vogue. I like to tell my children, I have a joke, I said, it took me this long, but now I'm in style. So what I think is popular now, this has taken a long, long time. I have a podcast, and I think some of you know that. And funders all listen to my podcast. They say, "Oh, it's our favorite podcast." I'm like, really? Because there was a while when everybody wanted to shut me down.
Paula and Nita, would you like to speak about the strategies you've employed against?
So of course, the main thing that when the BAS was closed, that the community came together, and like Donna said, Glasgow City Council went too far. They didn't ask the community of Govanhill. So the community said, no, we're going to occupy the building. But since then, of course, the trust has had to bring in a lot of money from different sources, including Glasgow City Council, who have contributed, like, I think it was £500,000 for the refurbishment. But I'm going to ask Neil Murphy, who's with us today, because he can talk a bit about the transfer of ownership of the BAS building from the City Council to the Govanhill Building Preservation Trust. Are you there, Neil?
Sure, absolutely, Paula. Thank you very much for this. This is interesting because it touches on some of the things that Donna's just been referring to as well. I mean, what we found in going through this experience, in order to access the funds, and what happened with Govanhill BAS was it was shut down for the want of about £300,000 because the boiler had broken down and needed to be replaced. But now, in order to, because of the state of the building, and we first started looking at this, obviously, it's been 2 decades since it was shut down. The state of the building has deteriorated so much that our budget now is around 9 million to get it all back into kind of, working order. And that's actually omitting the main pool from it because we don't have sufficient funds to repair the main pool, but the entire building will be made wind and watertight once more. In order to do that, we had to take ownership of the building. And to do that, we obviously had to, get it off the council. And there is a community asset transfer process you can use, but it was actually discouraged in our instance because there was worries that it might not follow through properly. So we ended up buying it directly off the council. But in order to do that, you have to get to know all of the officers in the council. They are the gatekeepers in something like this. So you have to kind of convey to them that you do actually have the capacity to be able to run what is actually a major municipal facility. So it's not easy doing that. And the legal discussions, we'd actually budgeted about £10,000 for the legals. We are currently up at £80,000 for the legals, which shows you, and having sat in on some of these discussions, I'm not a lawyer, I'm a conservation architect. And it's like watching these lawyers having kind of how many angels are on a pinhead conversations. And the lack of trust at times is depressing. And this is what I mean about people being gatekeepers. And so there was a whole debate about whether or not, if we did take ownership of the building, would we actually genuinely follow through on turning it into a health and wellbeing center? What if we converted it into flats? And you're like, the building, even though it looks as though it's made out of stone, is in fact ferroconcrete. and would be incredibly difficult to adapt into flats. You just wouldn't do it. And it's like, look, trust us, please. We are going to turn it into a health and well-being center. So you really do have to work on those relationships, and relationships with politicians as well. It's not a straightforward thing. So we've now finally taken ownership, and we started on site about a month and a half ago. So we are getting there, but we still have a really big journey to go on.
And this is very interesting, but things in India are so much different, and it's really kind of the strategies are also different. For example, I mean, the first thing is that the people that we are talking across the whole spectrum are not evenly literate. It's not to say that they're not skilled, and it's not to say that they're stupid. It's just that there seems to be a difference in the overall understanding of the same situation. So if you talk about an urban planner, but the service providers may not understand anything about urban planning at all, you know, and the city urban planners don't understand about the service providers. So I mean, there's this first is the biggest lack of communication. So what I have been doing now is trying to identify all stakeholders that come within the purview of any work I do, and I'm a conservation architect. So what I do is I pick up as many stakeholders and try to get a conversation going through all of them to at least have a common voice and understand what it is. So the first thing which I try to do is to give the voice to all stakeholders, rich and poor, upper class and lower class, all the users and all the stakeholders. The second thing, of course, is the education. Since I'm a professor, I like to take these as life projects, any project, and then try to educate the next generation to be more, to become more sensitive to such issues. Because really going to the government in India is like banging your head in the wall. And so I don't think in India we have a very good federal or state system where we can go with such issues. But coming from an educational background, if it goes to the government as a master plan, then the government is very happy to take it. So if the architects were to get together and give a proposal to the government, then the government would take it. So I mean, direct interaction with government is really of no use. And the third thing which I have learned from Architectural Fringes and Paula and Donna is that actually it's a sensitization. We in India, whenever we talk of sensitization, we talk of sensitization of the poor, the underprivileged, and the service providers. But I have learned that actually who needs sensitization are the upper class, are the people who are the exploiting, and the people who are really the policy makers. So the sensitization really will have to start there. And this is a section which I had never thought. And from all of you, this is what I'm learning, that actually the sensitization has to go from top to bottom, and the work has to go from bottom to the top. And this is what I'm learning, which I was not aware of. So that's in short what I understand.
If I could just respond to what Nita said quickly. We also have issues around education and understanding. There's barriers, right? And so what we do is we have a neighborhoods first strategy, and I'll put a link to the guidebook, where we create a common language. We educate common people on the language used, and we decide what terms are going to be used so that we build equity around some of the language. You don't have to be able to read it, but you have to be able to understand it. And we work and understand and value the expertise of people and their lived experience, and have them paired with technical experts to engage in co-planning of things. And it takes a little bit of work to really build respect on part of the technical experts, and then build sometimes confidence and the ability to speak on behalf of some of the residents. Although I will say that many of the residents are highly intelligent people. They're very good spokespeople. They just don't always have the microphone. And so giving them an opportunity to engage in a shared process is one of the ways that we organize. Sometimes people know there's a problem and they don't know how to name it. They know there's a solution, but they don't know how to describe it. And so it's our responsibility as interpreters to build that level playing field.
Yes. I would love to have that guidebook. Yes, please. I'll email you. Thank you.
Nita, I was just going to ask, is there any kind of vendor organization at all?
I'm sure there is. But usually when I was working for my other project, I found that all the roads led to local mafias and goons. And, somehow because they become the vote banks of the politicians, India is a democracy, and it is a democracy right till the lowest point. So that, which means to say that it is made up of, the people, they elect a corporator, and that corporator then elects the city council, and the city council elects the state, and the state elects the national members. So the vote bank really is the people on the ground. And usually those are the people and the corporators which form the main nexus for any type of activities. Leanne has put up a question about that too, that who owns the land. So it's these mafia people who actually are taking some sort of, in our word we say hafta, which is like a weekly small payment for allowing them to sit where they're, even the beggars pay a small amount to sit in the place to beg where they do. So there is somebody collecting that. So the people in the lowest rung are really politicians and mafia goons who are doing the job. So
sometimes it's also policemen. It's also the people who should be protecting these communities who are actually saying, okay, you give me money and I will let you stay where you are at.
Yeah. She's been working on the ground, so I never got it.
This puts me in mind of a statement I think, Nita, you had mentioned possibly our first meeting, where you said that the poor aren't the poor because they don't have money or they don't have land, but they are those who don't have a voice. And the poorest are those who have no voice. But I believe we have, so I'm just going to add to Liana's question here. Or Liana, would you like to ask the other part of your question?
Yes, so my question was really about how contested land is in all the different communities. So I think with Nita, she already touched on it. Who actually owns the land and who uses the land, and what is the conflict there? And I think for Detroit, for example, I'm aware of Hans Woodlands project, who I think owns like over 200 acres of land, very close to the city center and on the riverside, and has a contract with the city who enables him to, or with them as an organization, to buy up more land. And it's sold as a very positive project because it's like a beautification project, planting up loads of trees and on vacant lands. But there's also an idea of maybe that's a land grab attempt. And then of course for Govanhill and Scotland, I mean, like when we speak about land ownership in Scotland, it's usually linked to the Highlands and to the countryside, but like what is the conditions in the Scottish cities? So that was kind of like quite a long question, but for all of our participants.
Well, Hans Woodlands is in our footprint of Eastside Community Network, so we're really familiar with that. Basically, you have a billionaire who lives in one of the wealthy neighborhoods in Detroit. Detroit has concentrated poverty, and we also have concentrated wealth. And he lives in a concentrated wealth neighborhood that's surrounded by, it was surrounded by a lot of blight and abandonment, but, again, which is a consequence of public policy. But he had this theory that he could create scarcity in land to increase the value of land. And nobody quite understood what he meant, but he said, give me this land and I'll tear down all of the vacant homes. And he wanted to do this large community farming operation, and people in the community said, no, we don't want him doing that. We don't trust him. Why would you give him this much land when people who are living inside the community have really a hard time getting land to do things they want to do? And the thing about Detroiters is when they get the land, they do all kinds of creative stuff. I mean, when you give land to residents as landowners, if nothing else, you can turn it into a playground for your kids. You can turn it into a garden or something. But he had this theory, and the government said, okay, we're going to sell it to you for this very inexpensive price. And what he ended up doing is say he was going to do tree farming. And so I was kind of excited because I love trees. I was like, well, at least we're going to have trees. And then I drove by and I saw these little sticks sticking up out of the ground. I was like, well, you'll be able to sell these in about 30 years. I mean, it was like little seedlings he called tree farms. So, and they were just thrown together. They're really unattractive. So for many of us, it's a joke. And in fact, he made the growing of trees in urban communities really unattractive, but there was a huge outcry by many activists who said that's not a good idea. And at the time, it didn't seem to make sense. But now, look, you have Fiat Chrysler, now Stellantis has expanded its footprint in their community. And when they needed land to build a bigger factory, who had land? I'll tell you who, Hance Woodlands. So they were able to sell this land to the city, get additional land from the city, and negotiate their ownership of the land for a bigger stake in the East Side. The other thing is that the area around the Indian Village neighborhood he's in is rapidly gentrifying. And so now you see in these areas that he now owns, a lot of new stuff coming up. You see a lot of really expensive acquisition rehabs of vacant buildings. And so I'm quite sure that in the next few years, he's going to make a lot of money and be just a land baron. And our government let it happen. And it's interesting because, again, you know, a lot of the houses he tore down could have been saved, could have been refixed up. And so how do you have a housing shortage and vacant housing all in one city and not have governmental entities say, why don't we fix up vacant housing for poor people? And they live in the housing now, they just call it squatting. And, you know, so there's no water service, there's no heat, and it's an unhealthy place to live. A lot of times they're raising their children there because we have an affordable housing crisis in the city of Detroit. And so I think the question is who owns the land, who has access to it, and then who should have access to this land. And again, you had $600 million of overtaxation. You have people whose properties were taken for tax foreclosure, who had a legal right to have a tax abatement on their property because they qualified because we have this poverty exemption from property taxes, but they didn't know they qualified, and the city made it difficult for them to qualify. And so these are preventable problems that could have been fixed with public policy. And again, we still have the Detroit Land Bank today has about 90,000 parcels of land that could be used for the will of the people and the good of the people. And it's not until somebody like Hance Woodlands comes along and they want some, or Fiat Chrysler wanted to expand and the city gave them an entire, you know, city street, just closed down the street and said, now this is yours. So I think land very much is controlled by the city. It's used to reward wealthy people. And we need to do a better job making it accessible to poor people and really challenging every time a bad decision gets made.
I just want to add a little to what Donna was saying and to Leanne's question. See, there are two issues in the street vendors. One is where they are vending, which is what I kept pointing out. These are temporary spaces. So they are really not occupying it. I mean, at night, they just take their stuff away and go. There are very few shops which are left actually. So that land use is never going to stop in India. I very much doubt it. I mean, you cannot have an Indian city without the bazaar because that's how it works. But it's the housing of these people which is the issue that I was talking about. So, I mean, I just wanted to confirm, correct that. So that has to be on legal land because it is for because they cannot afford land in such high-end places where they serve. So that's why they have to squat. But if they were provided housing in the areas where they were serving, then they would not need to squat. So the street vendors, that's why that I took up the whole idea that they come in the morning and put their wares and that by evening they're all gone. So the street is absolutely free, but it's just during the day that is happening. Just leaving some garbage behind, that's the only issue. Other than that, it's their housing. And as Donna pointed out, then their families and their children and their quality of life is really poor. And that's what we are not thinking about.
So I was just wanting to say something about the ownership of the building, but also the ownership of the services, you know, for the community, by the community. For instance, another project in Glasgow that had a big campaign to save it was the Kelvin Grove Bandstand. So like the Bandstand in Queen's Park, but in a park in the West End of Glasgow. And that campaign went on for about 20 years, and it was successful. They saved the Bandstand. But now the Bandstand is run by Glasgow Life. I don't know if everyone knows that the library, the leisure, arts and recreation services in the city are run by an arm's length organisation. So Glasgow Life run Kelvin Grove Bandstand. The way it's organised is that it's used as a music venue for, you know, quite big rock bands during the summer, and the community really don't, the local community really don't have access to it. Whereas in Govanhill, in Queen's Park, the bandstand there is run by a social enterprise called In-House, and the community have absolute access. You can go in and sit and have your lunch. Okay, it does have some like music or gigs that you have to hire it for, but it is much better organised, I would say, compared to Kelvin Grove. The other thing as well is it's really important, and one of the reasons that Govanhill Basque Community Trust set up its archive, for instance, and its heritage projects, is because it really believes that, you know, access to your history, to your archive, to your community is part of your well-being. And in other parts of the city, for instance, the People's Palace and the Winter Gardens, again run by Glasgow Life, these places are not being given a priority by the city, and this big campaign that's going on at the moment called Glasgow Against Closures, people are finding it very difficult, because if the city, it's like, oh, it's not Glasgow City Council's fault because it's run by Glasgow Life. It's not Glasgow Life's fault because we've had this global pandemic and we don't have any money. So it's very difficult to, especially when it's your history, you know, if it's like archives or museums, so you can't access your own history. And your history is actually being owned, managed by an arm's length organisation, and charges you money even to access it. So these are the kind of issues that certainly within the archive and heritage projects at Govanhill Basque Community Trust, we want to really make sure that Govanhill has access to its history and can be involved in heritage projects, and that can go further.
Just to close us out, I just wanted to ask a question about hindsight, and hindsight to do with organizational hindsight, with about your work, but also personal hindsight, and to ask what is the kind of biggest thing that you have learnt or unlearnt through hindsight and the work that you do, firstly as an organization, and then secondly personally. And to Donna first.
Well, my organization, I've been working at the organization for 5 years, or in my 6th year. And just prior to me starting there, my organization led an effort to figure out whether or not we were going to support Hence Woodlands. And the organization actually went through a process and came out in support of it. And so when I took the helm of the organization, I had to figure out whether or not, you know, this made sense. And I think that it taught me that, you know, the organization had to learn you can't just support somebody because of what seems like an immediate good thing without looking at the long-term consequences. And I think that we all kind of regret having done that. So I don't think we'll be supporting those types of initiatives. For me, since I've been there, when Fiat Chrysler was first working to expand, I tried to work with them a little bit to try to, you know, try to be a mediator and try to figure out, does it make sense? You know, how can we make lemonade out of lemons? And so there were a lot of people who were immediately opposed, and I tried to play this middle ground road. I sometimes try to be a peacemaker, and I've had to learn not to try to be the peacemaker, but to be willing to stand sometimes and take these strong, courageous positions. I used to be afraid of the consequence to the organization and, you know, to my personal reputation if I come out too strongly, and I always want to see the other side. But the reality is there is only one side, and that side is justice. And I have to be a little bit sometimes quicker to understand what justice is. And so I think that for me and for my organization, I've had to strengthen our reputation as an organization that is uncompromising in terms of our stance on justice, and not sometimes willing to be the mediator or the peacemaker when in fact the issues are pretty clear.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Nita, same question to you.
I think what you have done is sensitized me, and I didn't know I had a voice, seriously. I always thought I had a voice as a professional, but I didn't think I had a voice as a human. And I never really walked into the public realm as a human being. I was always, that I could actually talk and make policies or help change them or do anything. And that was something that I really understood by talking to all of you, that I have a voice and it probably matters. I always tried giving voices to other people, but I just thought it was too pompous to make an opinion, and I would always lead from the back. But I realized that when you have to change things, sometimes you have to come up and lead the way. If that's my hindsight, that's how it should be done, and I believe it, and I've believed this for a long time, but I was just too scared to say it out loud, you know. And I think you people gave me a voice. Thank you very much, really. And for my organization, I've always been working, trying to give a voice to other people. And I'm hoping that by like the last 3 months, all the photographs and sketches are done by me. I spend 1 hour every day on the streets, sitting and observing people, photographing them, sketching them, dogs, cats, butterflies, birds, and trying to see what a world with everyone in it looks like, which really I had never seen from the high pedestal of my life, inside my comfortable house. So yeah, it's been really, really enriching, and I can see a future where I can give back to society as I become stronger. I'm not strong yet about these issues, but I hope to be. Yeah, that's a promise.
Thank you, Nita. That was great. And just lastly, Paula.
Lots of things are going through my head. Something that's always been really important to me in any work that I do is collaboration. And this is collaboration here. And I just think it's so important. And in Govanhill, there's just so many different social enterprises and organisations going on. There's inequality in terms of the resources that certain organisations have. So I think always Govanhill Basque Community Trust, all of its projects always punch above its weight. And it's kind of trying to say, you need to learn to say, actually, this is the resources we have. These are the hours I work. So, you know, how can we be at a table when someone else has just so much more resources? And I'm thinking about, again, independent community archives and museums. So we're involved with the Scottish Council on Archives, on the Community Archives and Heritage Group. But we're sitting alongside, you know, people who are on full-time jobs, so it's trying to learn how to collaborate, even if you're working with organisations that have very, very different resources. And I think that for me is personal and for the trust. Neil's going to say something on here as well about, because for the trust, if that's okay.
Sure, if you don't mind, just being, again, it's taking that point about collaboration, and that it's got to be grassroots upwards. So it's got to come, you know, from the bottom upwards. That's the absolute key to community empowerment. And the other thing is relationships, the 3 R's, relationships, relationships, relationships. You just got to keep communicating, and you've got to build relationships with people. And it's about getting those networks. And we're actually really lucky in the south side of Glasgow that we're not complacent about that. And those networks are really strong, but you really have to build those networks. And it's part of the Glasgow experience. I mean, what happened to our city in the 60s and 70s was that stuff was done to those communities, and those communities were shattered and, you know, spread to the 4 winds. And 40% of the city was demolished at that time. And so, you know, you have to realize that those soft aspects of a city are absolutely critical, and you really have to work and nourish and build them.
Okay, thanks, Steve.
Sorry, could I just quickly say something there as well? And that collaboration, and recognizing the good work of other people in your area, that it, you know, quite often, especially if you're going for funding, you're kind of pitted against people. But there's so many amazing projects going on in Govanhill, and it's kind of recognizing how good they are, and like that community strength when it all comes together.
Okay. And Anurupa and Ishita, do you have some final reflective hindsight thoughts on the work that you do?
Yeah, so that one thing that I really found that stood out in this conversation was the idea of community. Because whenever I think of community, I think about a neighborhood or just a few people coming together, just a neighborhood that becomes a community. But then I realized now that the community, like when Donna said about her parks and people coming together and actually creating parks together, I'm thinking, who am I going to get to come help me make a park? So that idea of community has to be more driven by a purpose, I guess, and some reason to be like out and become one as a unity. So that's something I want to be able to think about further and do something about it. But thank you so much for the question.
That's okay. And Anurupa?
Yes, sir. Actually, what I really want to see in future, that what ma'am says, that they need to sensitize the educated people actually, because the vendors, the street vendors, what I worked in my past life, like in rural area, I seen that they had land, they had different type of skills, but they don't have where they share the skills, who actually respect their skills. So for that monetary problem, they used to migrate in urban areas, but they didn't get the basic need, they didn't fulfill at all. So I just want to make sure that if there is any policies to make them basic needs can fulfill, like their children's education, children's health. Basically the vendors, the parents are working for their children and their next generation. But the harassment kind of things, like it can be from the local people, it can be from the political leaders, it can be from the police officials. So I think what they are doing, they need to do in peacefully and securely. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. That's great. Thank you so much. And just hand over to Liana now for final thanks.
Yes, sorry, we've overrun a little bit. But I mean, 2 hours go so quickly, and it's just such a great conversation, I think. So a massive thank you to all of our groups and to everybody who stayed with us for those 2.5 hours. The Fringe is still on until the 20th of June. On Thursday, we will dive a bit deeper into unlearning whiteness with an event titled Fictive Kinships and Counter-Narratives. Whiteness and white racialized identity refers to the way that white people, their customs, culture, and beliefs operate as a standard by which other groups of people are compared. Whiteness is subsequently deployed as a normal, where non-white people are seen as other. Whiteness, therefore, is a primary source of systemic racism. The event on Thursday seeks to understand whiteness in order to move beyond it to a place of liberation and a place where alternative ways of dreaming, living, and being can be explored with a focus on shared and intersectional goals. We will be joined by the amazing Amara Spence, who founded the Black Land and Spatial Justice Fund, and by Grace Demerich, an architectural advocate from New Orleans, who focuses on race, gender, and economic justice. We're also hoping to have Natasha Ruwana, a Scottish suburban artist, researcher, and programmer, joining us. Yeah, I hope to see you all there. We also have, continuing this week, our lunchtime series on new spatial realities, with talks from Numa Studio, Migrant Bureau, and Raising the Roof and Voices of Experience, who are discussing play, food, and later living and care home culture. All of that in separate events. So please do come along. Some final thanks and shout outs to our funders and sponsors, Creative Scotland, the Scottish Government, Collective Architecture, Hal Lucas Architects, and Moxon Architects, and of course to all of our Patreon supporters.
But thank you everyone, thanks so much for joining us, and we appreciate being here. Have a lovely Saturday afternoon.